and you would hear the managers walk into the HR leader's office and have no documentation, and their statement was something to the effect of, "This employee's not doing a good job. I've got to get rid of them. Let's put them on a PIP." And that whole performance improvement plan is clearly a great tool used by a good manager for the right outcomes, which is to realign that employee's performance with the expectations of the job description and really set that employee up for success. But so oftentimes that PIP just becomes a documentation tool that's a crutch for the documentation we didn't do, and maybe the hard conversations we didn't have with that employee along the way. So we use it as kind of the final step before we terminate somebody. So that's one I think that we all should revisit and rethink about, and maybe retrain our managers on.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, and this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. Please follow, rate, and review Good Morning HR on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or at goodmorninghr.com.
Inconceivable! You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
So every profession has its own vernacular, full of terminology often misunderstood and misused by those outside of the field. And often, people who know what they're talking about have to argue with people with no clue what they're talking about. And HR is no different. So joining me today to discuss oft misused HR terminology is my good friend, Jimmy Taylor. Jimmy is the executive director of DallasHR, a SHRM super mega chapter. Over his career, Jimmy's been a recruiter, an HR consultant, an entrepreneur. He's also past state director of Texas SHRM, after serving in volunteer roles for local SHRM chapters and Texas SHRM for almost 2 decades. He's a fun guy, and I'm glad to say he's a great friend and a patient friend. So I'm glad to finally get you on Good Morning HR, Jimmy.
Mike, I'm so glad to be with you. It's fun to be included. I've been a fan of your podcast for a while.
Oh, you're a liar, but I appreciate you doing that. So let's start by talking just about your role at DallasHR. You've had ED. I mean, you've been the executive director of DallasHR for just a few months. But before that, you were on their board of trustees. And like I said, you've been actively involved in Texas SHRM for a long time. What's DallasHR's mission, and how do they accomplish that? What's your role there? And then just kind of talk about SHRM in Texas.
Yeah, happy to do that, Mike. You and I think, share a common passion for volunteerism, particularly in HR associations. We've both done it for a long time, but DallasHR, we're just like the other 32 chapters around the state. Really, our formal mission is to serve our members and partners, to provide great educational offerings and network opportunities. But at its core, and I think the reason that you and I are so passionate about the local chapter and Texas SHRM, at its core, our mission really is to partner with the HR practitioners who are part of the association and really help them transform and improve their career so that they can transform and improve the organizations they serve and the people they work with every day. And that's the thing that I think we're most passionate about, is really being that tool, that mechanism to help people transform, certainly their careers, but even more so their lives. So that's why I love it. We do about 120 events a year. And certainly we have our biggest event of the year coming up in Fort Worth in a few months. In October, we'll be back at Tarrant County Convention Center for HR Southwest Conference. So that's a little bit about what we do. And from a broader perspective with Texas SHRM, it really is the same. The state organization exists to support those 32 local chapters. So if you are an HR practitioner and not plugged into your local chapter, personally, I believe you're missing a great opportunity to grow and develop your personal leadership skills.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of people in my HR network who reach out to me and say, well, I just found out my company's getting acquired and I'm going to lose my role. Can you plug me into a network? And I'm always like, now's not the time to be doing that. You should have done this 3 years ago when you were, firmly ensconced in your profession and your role, and start building the network through your local SHRM chapter and doing those kinds of things before you need the network. I mean, certainly it can help you get the network, but you and I both know a lot of people who got their role because they met somebody at a SHRM lunch or an HR association lunch, and 2 years ago, and those people knew them and trusted them. And when the position came open, they said, "Hey, here's a role for you. Are you interested in this?" And I think that networking is probably, you can get education, especially since COVID, right? Everybody's got webinars. There's a ton of stuff online. But I think there's still a ton of value about being in person and asking those questions of the experts and being in a room full of other practitioners. But I think the networking is the most valuable thing, the most underrated valuable thing that comes from being part of the association.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I'm sure you're the same. I talked to so many, senior HR leaders, and when you talk to them about their career journey and how they ended up in the role they ended up in, that SHRM chapter, that local leadership opportunity really factored into what they were doing and how they got there.
So this is a fun episode. So I posted on both the Evil HR Lady Facebook group, and I definitely encourage you, if you're on Facebook, which means you've got a certain amount of gray hair now. But if you're on Facebook, join the Evil HR Lady Facebook group, because there are a lot of great discussions and a lot of experts. They've even designated me as an expert, so maybe, like you say, a low bar. But it's there's a lot of good conversation there. But then also on DallasHR's HR Connect, which is the really statewide Texas, for lack of a better term, bulletin board conversation place for HR professionals who are members of the 32 SHRM chapters in Texas. I posted, so the question, what are your favorite misquoted or misunderstood, misused HR terms? And got a lot of feedback, got a great list. And this is probably going to be 2 or 3 episodes before it's over with, just to get through those lists. But I started with my favorite one, at will employment. You hear that all the time, or you hear people talk about right to work, and they mean at will, or they're talking about at will employment, and they mean at right to work. So I'm just going to clear that up. So maybe this will save me 15 posts in the next 6 weeks. But right to work has to do with unions. And you got 2 kinds of environments, basically. You got right to work, where an employer can have an agreement or cannot have an agreement, where the state law says an employer can't have an agreement that requires individuals to be a part of the union or to subsidize union activities. And then there's not right to work, forced union participation, where a union and an employer can have an agreement that says that even if you don't join the union, the employer can still, make you pay to the union some portion of the dues that go to the representation of the individuals. And then there's at will. And everybody gets this term, and I hear this wrong, both from employees and employers, especially managers, supervisors. Oh, well, we're an at will state. And so we can do whatever we want to. And no, you can't. Okay. At will means that you can end somebody's employment at any time for any legal cause. So there's a whole list, a growing list under federal law and different states' laws of what are illegal reasons. But as long as it's not prohibited by law, you can end an employment arrangement as an employer, or for no reason, which is a great way to get examined by a plaintiff's attorney. If you don't give them a reason, we're just going to, you don't work here anymore. Bye. But that, at will doesn't mean what I often hear. Oh, you can fire anybody at any time for any reason. There's a whole bunch of laws that prevent you from doing that. Title VII, ADEA, various state laws. We're in Texas, pew, pew. So we can do a lot. There's a lot of stuff that may be protected class in other states, but not here. But that term at will gets overly used, I think, sometimes by managers trying to bully HR into firing somebody for whom they have no documentation. Talk about that side of it. Just because you can, is it a good idea, Jimmy, just to fire somebody for no reason, no explanation, no documentation?
Oh, I think you're always on treacherous ground when you do that, and you're right, Mike. But I have a question for you. Does that mean that if I've just recently been accused of discrimination or harassment, I can't use at will employment to go terminate that person?
Oh, yeah. That's the person who accused you. Well, first of all, I know you well enough to know that person is a stinking liar. But but no, you cannot say, okay, you filed discrimination against somebody who's, in the organization, and we're going to go. That's retaliation. And retaliation's the number one, I think, still EEOC complaint. And so often, somebody files discrimination and maybe there's no underlying finding of discrimination, but the employer retaliated against that person for making that complaint or cooperating with the investigation for that complaint. And certainly you can't terms at will doesn't cover that. It's a mad world out there.
And all the more reason to make sure you're careful with proceeding, even if you're clear under the at will. I mean, it gets to not only the legal implications of the actions you're taking with that employee, but beyond that, which is so critical in today's culture, it really gets into the cultural applications of what's your workforce like, what's the engagement like of your employees, and so many times using even the correct terminology and definitions and potential legal usage of a right like at will employment can have horrific effects on our culture. So, I think it's wise. The question you ask is really wise. That even if we could do it, should we do it? Is there another alternative before we take this action?
Yeah, and at least let's get our ducks in a row. Let's make sure we've documented. And so too many managers put up with poor performance, poor attendance, poor behavior, and then when the straw breaks that camel's back, they want to get rid of them right away. And never mind the fact that on their performance review 6 weeks ago, we told them exceeds expectations across the board, and we've got no documentation of anything negative. But now we want to fire them. I mean, when people don't believe that they've been treated fairly, and that's when they go talk to plaintiffs' lawyers, right? And even if you win this lawsuit, you've lost. If it gets to the point where somebody's filing suit, so. And I really don't believe it's most HR people, and I don't even think it's most managers, but there are the occasional leaders in organizations who, see the workplace as more of a game of, Squid Games, where they're just going around and, Squid Games was a popular Netflix show, Jimmy. During Netflix is this thing where online you can watch TV and movies and stuff. So just so you
really,
know. But,
did that just come out?
Yeah, it's brand new. But anyway, so I do think there's a lot of managers who see their that workplace as kind of a competitive thing where it's adversarial between management and employees. That's really old school management, and I don't think those are going to be really successful leaders, especially with the latest generation of employees. But there was a certain group of boomers at one time. I worked for a few of them over the years who really did see that, had that attitude. So give me one of your favorite, what's one of your favorite HR terms that gets used wrong?
Well, I'll tell you a couple that are really my current favorites. One of them you just alluded to, talking about the manager documentation or lack thereof. So many times, and I did some consulting for a few years as well, and you would hear the managers walk into the HR leader's office and have no documentation, and their statement was something to the effect of, "This employee's not doing a good job. I've got to get rid of them. Let's put them on a PIP." And that whole performance improvement plan is clearly a great tool used by a good manager for the right outcomes, which is to realign that employee's performance with the expectations of the job description and really set that employee up for success. But so oftentimes that PIP just becomes a documentation tool that's a crutch for the documentation we didn't do, and maybe the hard conversations we didn't have with that employee along the way. So we use it as kind of the final step before we terminate somebody. So that's one I think that we all should revisit and rethink about, and maybe retrain our managers on. And the other one really doesn't have much legal implications, but I would say it has kind of pretty deep implications in the cultures that we're building, and that's the acronym RTO, RTW, return to work. And we've talked a lot about that coming out of the office. We're going to have a return to work plan, and here's how that's going to be executed and all that. And certainly not all organizations have used those words, but I've seen it quite a few times. And what we're communicating to that remote employee is, well, you obviously weren't working when you were working from home, and we're going to get back to the office. And so really what we ought to be saying is return to office, RTO, and not RTW. So those are two of my favorites that I see misused from time to time.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, premium background checks with fast and friendly service. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Recert Credits. Then select episode 58 and enter the keyword Jimmy. That's JIMMY. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. Each approved for an hour of recertification credit by both HRCI and SHRM. 3 are even approved for HRCI business credit, and 1 qualifies for ethics credit. You can access all of these webinars for free at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Jimmy Taylor. There's a lot of old school management. I think the whole PIP idea came about from organized environments originally, and very structured processes where you have to have a verbal warning, and then you get the first written warning and a second written. It's this whole construct where under those labor agreements, it was almost impossible to get rid of a bad apple until you went through all the processes. And then there's this expectation from employees, and a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of managers write their PIPs or even their processes and policies in the organization outline a progressive discipline policy that ties managers' hands. A well-intentioned manager who's giving constant feedback. Hey, here's the problem. Here's what needs to happen. Here's how we correct it. Let me help you do that. And works on it and documents it along the way and all that. And then they get to the point where they're ready to terminate somebody. Oh, well, you didn't follow our policy. And our policy requires that you fill out a form 996, and then you do this, and then you go through here, and HR and your senior vice president has to approve it. And then you go through, and all the time you've got somebody spoiling the atmosphere, the workplace, stopping the organization from achieving its goals because they need to go. And so I think sometimes in some environments, they go too far on the PIPs to make the PIPs just a set of hurdles that managers have to jump through when they're doing the right thing. And it almost guarantees that employee gets, a 30-day probationary period, or 60 days, or a 90-day. And the only time to ever do a 90-day PIP is when it's a competency. Okay, you're not measuring up to the level of what we need you to be able to do in the job. We think you can do it. We're going to give you the mentoring, the coaching. We're going to work with you to get there. But if it's just behavior, I'm not giving you a 90-day plan about getting to work on time. Okay, the day starts at 8 o'clock. We have team members and clients who are depending on you to be at your desk answering phones at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock or whatever time is, and you're going to be there. And if you don't, we're going to have a conversation. But very quickly, that's going to lead to a termination thing if you're not there to serve our clients or your team members. And we're not going to give you 90 days to improve that.
Yeah, agreed. And Mike, don't you find that I know you work with a lot of great managers, and I have had the opportunity to do that as well. Don't you find those good managers are having those difficult conversations, the kinds of conversations that you might have during a normal PIP conversation? regularly with employees as they're needed. They're not waiting for things to get so out of hand that there's no other recourse or course of action. They're having those weekly conversations as a check-in call to make sure they're on the right path. And I think that's one of the things that we should all take away is what are those great managers doing that maybe these practices were well intentioned and well documented to provide or to support that behavior, but do it ahead of time.
And I think that's another thing that goes back to the often maligned, I guess, millennials, is they want that feedback. They want that constant feedback. And a lot of older school managers say that, they want gold stars, they want pats on the head, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of times what they want to know is they want to know what their performance is. Are they meeting expectations? What can they do to improve and move forward? And waiting for your annual performance review or or things to get so frustrating for the manager that you don't hear about it till then. It's too late. Those are those needed and important employees will move on someplace else if you just lay on them all of a sudden. Oh yeah, you've been doing this job wrong for the last 3 months, and I've seen it every day, and I haven't said a word to you about it.
Yeah. I know this is probably not on your list, but in today's environment, do you believe an annual performance review is an obsolete item?
If anybody is listening to this podcast for very long, they know I hate, and we got rid of them a long time ago in our organization. Everybody has numbers in our organization, and on a daily basis, all my operations people, when they walk in, they have an email that tells what their productivity and their quality was the day before, and they know exactly where they stand. They know what the standards are, and then on a weekly basis they get in. We use additional PTO as an incentive. So if somebody hits their goal for the week, they get an extra, I want to say 2 or 3 hours of PTO added to their bank, and that's just a recognition that they're doing it. And if somebody 2 or 3 weeks in a row isn't hitting their goals, they're definitely having a conversation with management about, you can have an off week or two, but when we see a consistent pattern of being underperforming, we're going to have a conversation and say, hey, so what's going on? What do you need from us? What retrain, we're seeing this consistent pattern in the errors you're making. So let's do some retraining or whatever. And often it's even happened casually between their peers because, everybody sees everybody's work in our organization a lot, and there's a lot of peer review work. And so they're getting feedback, but waiting until, an annual performance review is just, ridiculous. Everybody, I think everybody ought to know where they stand all the time. There should be no surprises.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And you think about it, it's almost cruel. It's almost cruel to leave an employee in suspense for 12 months or 10 months until the annual performance review. I mean, how upsetting and maybe unmotivating is that type of behavior? And it's hard. Managers are busy. It's hard to take that time to stop and do just what you said. But boy, I'm sure you found out it pays off in spades with your employees in terms of the quality of the work they do.
And if you're going to be a leader, that's your job. That's and I wrote that blog for Texas SHRM last year about we need to take the term manager off people's titles, and I don't want to use the term manager, but I still use it a lot out of reflex. But you can manage processes, you can manage material, you can manage computer code, you can manage a lot of things, but trying to manage people are a hot mess. You're not going to manage people any more than you're going to manage a bunch of chickens running loose in the farmyard. There's just, you're not going to corral people. You're not going to manage. We come to work every day differently, and we have different experiences. People have different pressures. A leader understands those things, helps people succeed in our domain, in the work domain, despite those issues outside, or helps people find the resources to even help with their outside issues. But that's not managing people. That, you can manage, okay, here's what the outcomes we're looking towards and what we need to plan for and all of that. But when it comes to people, they need leaders.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're singing my tune. You know how much I like a CEO by the name of Bob Chapman.
Yeah.
He's CEO of an organization in St. Louis, Barry Waymiller. Great company, incredible organization, very
And he
transformative.
wrote Everybody Matters.
He
That's
did.
his
He
book,
wrote
right? Yeah.
Everybody Matters. But I had an opportunity to spend a few minutes in his office a couple of years ago, and I'm like you. I try not to use that manager term, but we default to it because we've used it our entire career. And I probably 5 minutes into the conversation, I used the term manager, and he immediately stopped me. He said, "I'm sorry, but we don't let people in our offices use that term. Yeah, they're leaders, but we don't have managers. Nobody wants to be managed." And it's so true. You can manage outcomes and processes, but you can't really manage people. You can only lead them.
So let's talk about another thing that another term managers like to use, and I'm talking this time about managers usually instead of leaders, but insubordination. Well, he was insubordinate, and we're going to terminate him because insubordination is a violation of our policy. And then you start talking to him about what does insubordination mean? What do you mean by that? Well, he wasn't cheerful when he greeted me this morning, or I gave him this assignment and he didn't kiss my shoes, or for giving him this great assignment. And you get down to it, and often, okay, so this person doesn't love you, and or this person, they're doing their job, their performance is where you want it. And so when you're talking to, and you've done a ton of consulting, when you're talking about insubordination, what's your go-to definition for that when it's actual insubordination that the company needs to take action on?
Oh, I'd go to HR Connect to get the definition, but really, it's just an unwillingness to follow a leader's directions when they know what's clearly being expected of them, or it's using maybe inappropriate language in the workplace, or certainly maybe confronting a manager in a team meeting, or doing something that's clearly disruptive. And that's what I consider to be insubordination. Your example of what's not insubordination is good. I mean, sometimes we think, oh, they're questioning my ethics, and so they're being insubordinate. There's a whole host of things that employees can and probably should do that aren't insubordination that sometimes we think they are. But that's probably my working definition. Is just really exhibiting behaviors that are clearly inappropriate for the workplace, either through the words or actions or deeds, storming out of a meeting, or things that clearly we can't condone.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of times where managers take things personally. I mean, we're people, right? And leaders will sometimes, you know, take it personally if somebody disagrees with them. And sometimes, some of our employees aren't always the most tactful, and it'll be not the right time to bring something up in a certain meeting or in front of certain customers or stakeholders, and sometimes people do that out of motives other than the best interest of everybody involved. But the first step ought to be, okay, step away from this and let's just examine the reality and what's the truth and what they're doing and what they're saying. Let's acknowledge that if it's there, and then let's talk to them, have this conversation about the right place, the right time, how to approach this. But so often when I hear that term insubordination, it has more to do with, this manager got his feelings hurt, or he didn't get the respect he felt like he was owed. And so it's just more on a personal level.
Do you find leaders who want to terminate for insubordination? Do you find that they're on rocky ground?
Well, it just depends on what the insubordination is. I mean, if it's really blatant, like, if there's certain behavior. I mean, me personally, an employee can say whatever they want to me often. I mean, it's I've and they can push back. I want my employees to push back because I'm a straight to intuition guy. I'm a quick start, make quick decisions, follow my intuition, and it works for me about 90% of the time. But the other 10%, it can be phenomenally hurtful and bad for the organization. And so I've surrounded myself with people who I've coached to push back, and I want them to But, if somebody calls their, in the middle of middle of a meeting, calls their manager an SOB, takes something really personal, gets up and storms out of the room and causes a big ruckus, maybe, depending on the circumstances. And you're not ever supposed to say this, but the overall value of that employee to the organization, maybe that is a termination. Maybe this is a relatively new employee. And at this point, this behavior suggests to us we don't want to invest a lot more into this employee to make them successful. I think that's fine. I don't think that's a giant problem. But I think where a manager is taking something personal versus just saying this isn't living up to our values, and this isn't in alignment with the way we as an organization do business. I think it's fine to terminate somebody for the behavior. But I think just calling it insubordination, call it whatever you want to. Let's get into the details and let's talk about the specific behaviors that cause the problem. But again, sometimes there's some truth in some of that. And sometimes those things have been building up, just like managers let things build up with employees who often, especially in organizations that don't have great culture, do feel disempowered or less empowered than their management to speak up or to express concerns, and things do build and build and build. And then boom, this employee loses their crap in the middle of a meeting and acts out inappropriately. Maybe sometimes we need to say, you know what? I understand how that built up. And coach the employee, here's what you need to do in the future when you start feeling these pressures, let's have these conversations, but also talk to the manager. You've got to create in your organization, you've got to go from manager to leader and build an environment where people can move forward. And so, when we use a catch-all phrase like insubordination, I think we kind of aren't necessarily we're shortcutting it a little bit.
Right. I would agree.
Give me your last favorite one. We're almost out of time, but I want to give me your last favorite one.
Oh, my last favorite one. Oh gosh, let's see. How about retaliation in the workplace?
Yeah. Every time I don't get what I want in the organization, it's retaliation. They're retaliating. If I asked for next Friday off and somebody says, sorry, John and Susie both have Friday off and we really need you to be here if it's at all, possible, because we need to serve our customers and our, and other stakeholders. And so sorry, they got the time off before they requested it before you did, and we need you here. Oh, it's retaliation. And you say, well, retaliation for what? For me asking off. And so, I'm trying to use my benefits. I just got into a bit of a dust up on, and I spend too much time probably on the internet, but a bit of a dust up on a HR forum with someone who's talking about professionals do not need to request to use their PTO. And I'm like, people who don't request to use their PTO are called unemployed people. Unemployed people don't have to request to use their PTO, but everybody else, professionals, have to talk to their peers. They have to talk to the team. You've got to talk to, if you want to plan this time off, that's great. And I want my employees to use their PTO as much as, I don't want people carrying giant banks of PTO. I want them to use it. That's why it's there. But you got to coordinate it with the rest of your team. You got to plan this stuff. And it's not retaliation if a manager tells you no. And I hear retaliation a lot. I did a big investigation for a large local employer a while back. And one of the things that kept coming up in the complaint was retaliation. And you start going through it, and then it's retaliation, but they're not saying retaliation for what. And so I sit down and interview the complainant, and I said, so explain the retaliation piece of this. And the retaliation was, well, they don't like me and they're retaliating because they don't like me. And I'm like, well, that's not, again, you keep using that word, but I don't think it means what you think it means. And so they, and in that case, there was nothing illegal going on that I found in the employer, no violations of Title VII, like that, no legal. And that's the other thing. A lot of these terms have legal meanings.
Right.
And colloquial meetings. And so, retaliation, maybe they are retaliating. But if it's not retaliation for some protected activity, for for participating, for making a claim under Title VII or ADA or whatever, it's not, if it's not retaliation for doing something that you legally, it's a legally protected activity under one of the employment laws or civil rights laws, it ain't retaliation from a legal point of view. Just, and so maybe it is. Maybe the manager hates, Teslas, and you just bought a Tesla and drove it into the parking lot, and he's gonna give you a hard day because he thinks Elon Musk is a horrible person. Well, he may retaliate, and maybe it's bad leadership, but it ain't illegal.
And in fact, legally, isn't it difficult to prove retaliation unless there's been a formal complaint required, even if the act was a protected activity?
Yeah, if you see it, if there's a reason for a manager to believe the person is going, like the employee says, I'm not comfortable with that language that you're using, and I'm going to complain to HR, and the manager takes action before you ever make it to HR, I think that's probably retaliation.
Right.
But most of the time that you need, there's got to be a preceding event, and there's got to be something to point to, and employees like those terms. And you get on, if you get on a lot of blogs, especially the plaintiff lawyer blogs, they're not always real clear, in their marketing about what retaliation is. They want to get you in the office, and they may often and I've got lots of plaintiff lawyer friends. Hi, Jim Zeta, but some of the employment law plaintiffs attorneys just want to get you in the office, and because they know the right questions to ask, and it may not be retaliation that they find, but they're going to ask about a lot of your employment practices. And in some employers, they're going to, they may be able to find something that doesn't sound quite right, and that they can squeeze the employer for and get a quick settlement.
Yeah, it is definitely a term that I hear thrown out so much, though, that was retaliation, and there should be something I can do about that. And it's a pretty misused term, like some of the others we've been discussing, I think.
And we've got a long list from our source of other terms, and we're out of time. But please, in the comments, if you're looking at this on the Facebook site or on goodmorninghr.com, drop in your favorite terms. And so that I think this is going to end up being a series of episodes where I talk to folks about some of these terms and we get deeper into them. But you can also plan on learning more about a lot of these topics, as well as legal updates and professional growth opportunities during the 80 sessions offered during HR Southwest, October 16th through 19th, right here in Fort Worth, Texas. Even though it's DallasHR, they bring HR Southwest to the crown of North Texas, Fort Worth. So you can come see a beautiful Cowtown and get a lot of CE, meet some great people. And Jimmy and I will undoubtedly buy you a drink at some point while you're here.
There is no better place for a conference than Fort Worth, Texas.
Preach. So you can learn more about HR Southwest at hrsouthwest.com. And that is all the time we've got today, but thanks a lot again, Jimmy, for joining me.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Mike.
And thank you for listening. You can find previous episodes, show notes, and contact info for our guest at goodmorninghr.com or on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcast. And rate us. Say how great this is. And if you don't like it, don't rate us. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you, personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.